What do Falcons do? We rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general, the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, the Golden Hard Dog, and a lifelong sports fan. Coming back to you today with what I think is going to be a fun video. I am going to do 10 hot takes / bold predictions for the Atlanta Falcons 2024 season. So with that, let's jump into it. I know a lot of people have said the Falcons just completely screwed up the draft, and I tend to agree in some ways, but in others I could see the moves that we're making for the future. And we definitely took guys that have potential to be great for us in the future, but are probably going to start off as depth pieces. Obviously, we have the Michael Penix pick, which has a lot of controversy around it. There's more people warming up to it. I still wish we'd done something different, but we can't go back and change anything now. So let's just jump right into the bold predictions. We should still be a very good team regardless this year. Now, let's start off with this one. Number one, Kyle Pitts is going to finish the season as fantasy tight end 2, or potentially even better at fantasy tight end number 1. Now, there's evidence for this. So you have Kirk Cousins, who has been very tight end friendly through his career. Initially, I was saying Logan Thomas was his tight end. I forgot who the actual guy was, but it was Jordan Reed in Washington. And in Washington, with a healthy Jordan Reed, and we all know that he had health issues for a long time in the league, but he finished as tight end number 7, tight end number 2, and tight end number 4, but was averaging tight end 1 per game that he actually played. With Kirk Cousins at the helm at quarterback. So you had Jordan Reed finishing as a very solid tight end, and I think he's significantly less talented than Kyle Pitts. Then you have another guy at Minnesota in T.J. Hockenson for the last couple of seasons. He's finished as tight end 2 and tight end number 4, but again, he was also finishing with numbers that would suggest tight end 1 production. He was actually tied in fantasy points per game with Travis Kelce, who finished as tight end number 1. Very close to tight end number 1. Sam Laporta kind of blew everybody away with his touchdowns last year. That's probably going to regress a little bit. But again, I think Kyle Pitts is better than T.J. Hockenson. I think he is better than Jordan Reed. And with this kind of talent, if we have Zach Robinson turns out to be a half-decent shot caller, then I don't think it can go wrong with Kirk Cousins to Kyle Pitts. The only way that derails is if Kirk gets hurt, and we're not planning on that for any of these bold predictions. The second bold prediction is that the Falcons are going to clean sweep the NFC South, going 6-0 in division. Last year, we probably should have at least gone 5-1. We actually should have beat Tampa Bay twice. Poor quarterback play in both of those games caused the scores to be very close, winning one, losing another. But we actually outproduced on offense by like 200 yards in our loss, and most of the production for Tampa Bay came on really bad turnovers, costly turnovers. So with that in mind, Tampa Bay, I don't think, has significantly changed their team that much from last year. Carolina is still weak, though we did lose on the road, again, because of poor quarterback play mostly, and poor decision-making. There was a pick late in the game that cost us that one, but we were winning for the most part for most of the game. And then you have the Saints, and we beat them once last year, and then they beat the crap out of us in the second half of the season closer last year. But they also did that dirty move with Jameis Winston, fake kneeling to get a touchdown, which is going to live on in the minds of the players. It's going to live on in the minds of the front office staff. We have a new coaching staff, except for the special teams coordinator, but they are all going to be pissed, and I think it could be very likely that we sweep the division this year because of frustration, because of the talent that we have from the last couple of years. And none of the teams, I think, improved as much as the Falcons have overall. Then we go in number 3. We don't really have a solid edge rusher that's starting the season, but I do think that Arnold Ebiketie, our 2022 second-round pick, is going to step up and finally hit his stride in his 3rd year and go for 12-plus sacks. He's meant to be a 3-4 guy. He had to play in a 4-3. He's been a rotational component. His first year, he was not used exclusively, just they were trying to see what they had with him, and he was actually on pace, had he played every snap, to have 10-plus sacks, but he was only playing about a third to half of the actual defensive snaps. So I do think that with Raheem Morris at the helm, a guy who's known to take kind of weaker talent or not as good talent, maybe lesser known, and turn them into solid players, I think Arnold Ebiketie certainly could be a guy that gets 12-plus sacks and really helps turn it on for the team and get that defensive pressure up. There's going to be a couple of more stats here talking about defense later, but I do think that that is a very realistic hot take for the Falcons to have one guy that breaks out. Other guys that could fill that role, you got Braylon Trice coming in. He's a rookie. He could fill that role. I hope he does. Zach Harrison also is hitting his stride in the second half of last year. I think he had 5 or 6 sacks. So either one of those guys, any of them could plug and play, but I do think we'll end up with a 10-plus sack rusher. But I'm going to go ahead and say Arnold Ebiketie ends up getting it done with 12-plus. Then we're going to go to number 4, Kirk Cousins. I think he is going to win both Comeback Player of the Year because he went out in the middle of last year. He's going to be coming back from injury, so certainly can make a big case if he has a good year. But I also think the bigger of the bold predictions, he wins NFL MVP. Now, this is the controversial one. He was on pace last year to win MVP before going out in his Week 8 debut against the Green Bay Packers. Couldn't finish the game, tore his Achilles, but he had 18 touchdowns and 5 interceptions with 23-plus 100 yards at that point in the season when he went out, not even completing the game against Green Bay. He was on pace for almost 5,000 yards, 38-plus touchdowns, and 10 or fewer interceptions at that point. And honestly, that would have won MVP over Lamar Jackson. Lamar only had, I think, about 3,600 yards passing. He had another 800 on the ground. Altogether, I believe he had less than 38 touchdowns between the air and the ground, so Kirk would have had better production overall than him, and I think that's certainly something that could happen this year with a solid run-blocking offensive line, great weapons to hand off to, and a solid receiving core that could be top 10 in the league, if not a little bit better, with some of the changes that have been made. Plus, Zach Robinson, again, it's all going to depend on him as the shot caller, but I do think Kirk could step in, and I'm predicting him to have 4,800 yards, 37-plus touchdowns, and 7 or fewer interceptions this year, which would put him at fantasy QB1, and it would also put him at MVP level. So then we're going to jump on and go to number 5, and this one's fairly straightforward. The Falcons are set to have potentially the easiest schedule based on previous year's records. Had we talked about this before making the change to Raheem Morris, before getting Kirk Cousins, I would have said we had one of the harder schedules, but with the offense revamping, with the defense bringing back a lot of key pieces, we're still missing a couple of our edge rushers, but we do have guys that I think are going to take a step forward. We're going to be changing the defensive scheme, and we do have guys like Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris who are great with secondary coaching, so they can coach up some of the guys that are already in the room and hopefully at least pick up another guy or two in free agency. But I do think the Falcons, the bold take here, we win 14 regular season games and secure the number 1 seed in the NFC to get the bye. Certainly a hot take, but let's see what ends up happening with the season. Number 6, Bijan Robinson, the stud running back for the Falcons, taken in last year's draft over defensive talent Jalen Carter and a couple of other guys. I think that he is going to have a true breakout year, no longer being shackled by the Arthur Smith scheme. I believe that he is going to have 18-plus touchdowns between rushing and receiving, and that will be good enough to put him at RB2 behind Christian McCaffrey, who is still the GOAT at running back for the current league iteration until proven otherwise. But I do think he finishes RB2. And again, I think he's healthy. I think he has a great run line. I think he has a quarterback who loves to dump off to to a running back when his receivers are not open, but can actually go through some progressions and make him better as a running back. And again, I think he's going to have significantly less difficulty finding space because they're not going to be able to load the box with 7 or 8 guys because now they legitimately have to worry about the quarterback position. So I do think that Bijan ends up as RB2, and I think he has a slim shot at getting RB1. But I'm going to say the bold prediction, RB2 with 18-plus touchdowns, rushing and receiving combined. Then we're going to go to number 7, and this is kind of as our secondary as a whole, but I specifically want to point out our 7th-round pick from last year. I think DeMarco Hellams emerges as a lockdown safety. I think he's got that dog in him, and I think the Falcons, as a whole, end up with a top 3 secondary unit with a career year by A.J. Terrell, Jesse Bates already being top 1, top 2 safety in the league, and then Clark Phillips III emerging as a solid top 20 corner, possibly better in the league, to give us a really solid room. And again, I've already talked about Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris being solid with secondary, taking a lot of guys from the 3rd, 4th, 5th plus rounds last year and making them into a fairly elite defensive unit. We certainly have some key pieces in Terrell and Bates, and if they stay healthy, along with Phillips and Hellams, I think that core could certainly be a great thing for the Falcons. So I'm going to say that our secondary ends up finishing as top 3 by the numbers by the end of the season. Number 8, Rondale Moore. He is the guy that we got for the trade with the Arizona Cardinals for Desmond Ridder. Rondale Moore is very undersized. I'm only about 5'5". He's just 2 inches taller than me at 5'7". So he is a tiny guy on the field, but he is dynamic. There's a reason he was taken in the second round in 2021 by the Cardinals, and I do believe that he has the potential. And this is going to be the bold prediction. I think because of how Zach Robinson has learned offensive scheming, because of what Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have done with the Rams being solid slot receivers, getting most of their production out of the slot, I do think that Zach Robinson is going to utilize the slot more than he uses the outside. And for that reason, I think that Rondale Moore will outproduce Drake London this year for the Falcons. Drake London should still have a very good year, but I think that by a slim margin, Rondale Moore will emerge as wide receiver 1/2 for the team, predominantly because of what's done in the slot and the scheming that actually gets him open utilizing Drake London. But I do think that that's a very realistic possibility if he ends up staying healthy and if he is what we hope he can be for the Falcons. Number 9, I think the Falcons will have a top 5 defensive line. Now, we finished with only 42 sacks last year, less than 100 QB pressures, but this is what happened. We lost Grady Jarrett to the season, the heart and soul of the defense, and David Onyemata was fluctuating with good health as our defensive tackle. We were running with guys that we just kind of had to make work last year towards the end of the year, which is why we beefed up the defensive tackle, the interior in the draft this year. We took Rook Ororo in the second round. I actually traded up to get him. Solid guy. He has a lot of power, and he's obviously the heir apparent to either Grady Jarrett or David Onyemata, or both if we don't re-sign either one of those guys. And then you also had Brandon Dorlus out of Oregon, taken in the 4th round, a guy who had late 2nd round, early 3rd round grading for a lot of people, but ended up getting him in the early portion of the 4th, so you get some solid value, but another solid defensive player. You end up taking an inside linebacker in the 5th round, and then you get Zion Lowe possibly to make the team over guys like Taquan Graham as just a bruising nose tackle. So I do think that we are going to improve our pressure through the middle with a healthy defensive line. That will open things up for the edge rushers as we collapse the pocket from the interior. So you'll have guys like Braylon Trice, like Arlen Ebiketie, who are able to easier get to the quarterback because that pocket is collapsing because guys like Grady Jarrett and Onyemata and Ororo are there. So I do think that we end up finishing with a top 5 defensive line as a hot take. We have not done that in the last 7 or 8 years, but I do think that it's a realistic possibility for the Falcons, and I'm going to stick with that as a solid, bold prediction. And the final bold prediction, number 10. You all knew this was coming. I don't think the Falcons are going to make the Super Bowl this year. I just think we are still a couple of key positions away. But we thought that Houston was a lot of positions away from improving their team to even being a playoff team, and all they did is turn themselves into a dynamic team, making it past the wild card round and into the divisional round this past year. So I do think that the Falcons have done enough, and I think that they will, if they get that first week bye in the playoffs, I think they win in the divisional round, and they at least make it to the NFC Championship. Now, whether they win that and go on to the Super Bowl, I don't know. I think it's too soon for that, but I think a bold prediction still would be A, the 14-plus wins, and B, making it to the NFC Championship. That's all I got for you today, guys, though. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. How crazy are some of these takes? Do you have any bold takes for your team? I'd love to hear about them down below. I just did an interview with Paul Jr., guy that I met through one of my other videos, reached out to me. I will link that video at the end here, but feel free to go back and watch it. It's about an hour long. Really, really solid guy. Enjoyed doing that video with him. And just watch his content too. He's going to be interviewing all of the NFL fandoms over the course of the next coming weeks and months. He's trying to reach out. He's going in alphabetical order, it seems like, right now. And again, I feel like he did really solid work. He had great questions prepared, and hopefully I made Falcons Nation proud. But thank you for watching, liking, sharing, and subscribing. And as always, rise up.